Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was 22 and living on my own for the first time when this happened. I had just gotten off work around 11 in the afternoon. To reach my apartment building, I could either walk on the sidewalk or cut across this communal garden. I saved about one whole minute of walking time by cutting through the communal garden, but being young and stupid, a lot of times I took the shortcut. That night, I got that weird feeling to not take the shortcut. I kept to the sidewalk, but there's no one else around. When I got past the garden, all of a sudden, this large man pops up from its exit path. There was no way he could have been in front of me or just behind me as I was walking. I would have noticed him. The only logical explanation was he had been hiding in the pitch black garden. A drunk who had been sleeping it off. No, my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I began walking faster. My dad had taught me to always carry my keys in my fist with the key pointed out in case I needed to punch someone, so I had that, but I'm 5'4" and probably weighed 110 pounds. This guy was tall and big. My only chance was to outpace him. I'm speed walking at this point and I feel him matching my pace, getting closer. He's breathing heavily. I feel this angry energy coming off of him, but my apartment building is right there, so I put on a burst at speed. When I reach the entrance, two people are leaving and hold the door for me. And him, I don't know why I didn't tell them I thought this guy was following me. My mind froze and I was just trying to get inside my apartment. Plus, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was visiting someone in the building. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Don't be paranoid. Besides, it took only a couple seconds for them to be out the door. I had missed my chance. I'm climbing the stairs as fast as I can. It's a 3-story building and I live on the 3rd floor. He's climbing the stairs too, still right behind me. I get to my floor, which has 4 apartments on the right side and 4 on the left. I pass by apartments 1 and 2. He's still right behind me. I stop at apartment 3 and he stops in front of apartment 4 where I know he doesn't live. He hasn't said anything, just breathing hard, and I think there's no way I'm going to open my apartment door and have him push me inside and assault me or worse. He also hasn't knocked on the door of apartment 4. Worth noting is that the apartments are U-shaped, with mine and my neighbor's door being very close together. So I bang my own apartment door as loud as I could but yell my neighbor's name. Hey Kevin, let me in. This startles the guy, even more so when my own apartment door doesn't open but Kevin's does. Kevin sees the guy standing right in front of his door and asks what he wants. The guy starts mumbling something about the wrong apartment, but I have my own door open so fast that I am inside my place in a flash, locking the door behind me. I grab my cordless phone to call the police, but I hear Kevin through the door telling this guy he needs to leave. The guy does. Kevin knocks on my door, asks if I'm okay. I thank him, say that I am, but inside I am still frozen, adrenaline pumping, scared. I thank him again and tell him to have a good night, lock my door again. I have my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but I start trying to rationalize it again. What exactly happened? A guy followed me home but then said he had the wrong apartment. Are the cops going to care about something minor like that? I try to calm myself down, but I'm also berating myself. Why didn't I run the instant I felt him following me? Why didn't I tell the people we passed when the front door opened that I thought I was being chased? Worse, why didn't I tell Kevin that the second he opened his door and saved me? He could have let me inside his apartment and we could have called the cops together. But because of my stupidity, everything felt so ambiguous and I was questioning myself. A couple of weeks later, I'm visiting my grandparents and my grandfather is reading the paper. He tells me that a woman was assaulted in the apartment building across the street from mine. It's the same guy. He had multiple convictions for assault and had recently been released on parole. For context, I am a 20-year-old female and at the time of these events I was around 12 and 13, so I grew up in a very rural area. Like my town was so small it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres. My childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, we will call him T, had been living across near my family for as long as I can remember and he rented out a trailer he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, we will call him Jay. Jay and his girlfriend, who we will call, had moved in a few months before these events and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them but hadn't interacted with them directly the day I met Jay and it was extremely awkward as I was a kid and didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables she had grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandma knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad but I'm not judging. My grandma started the conversation and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. me. He looked like he was either mad or hungry. We're both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stare as just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours while me and my brother played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He'd make sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house when she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I had begun to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me, tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball, tried to get me to go with him and into the movies. And none of these things ever included my brother, Olive. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard, and he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was always just off with him. But that day I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet from me. She tore to his arm and I saw blood. I screamed and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer her and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital as Jay, and it didn't have a car, and I learned later he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since and still terrified to this day to run into him again. I want to tell this story to warn others. I, an 18-year-old female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little better. Just this same night, before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me I was so happy and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am. A lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was a joke between two friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. Not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small, white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing, I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change. I told him. He grabbed another dollar and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name I don't use and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom might have been happy to see. I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name. I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear, facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them best I can, giving him zero correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys are trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, don't be like that, I'll treat you right. I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed he was watching the restaurant. I was shaky by this time and called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, he's the best. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. These interactions are unfortunately what caused formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'll be taking a couple days off. I had already had another job lined up, and I'm excited to start it. I'm currently traveling sea with my two brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my two brothers decided to sit on a bench in Hao Dan Park and have a quick smoke. We were chatting away, sat on the bench, when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first I wasn't too concerned about him, however my spider senses were alerted. Then a minute or two later I noticed another Vietnamese man dressed as a Grab delivery driver acting suspicious and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on the phone and I believe they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, this alerted us heavily and we decided to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. They then overtook us and sat at a bench further down the path waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on muddy grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit, avoiding the two men who were still watching us and clearly had bad intentions. We are 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit, noticing the second assailant was also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispery Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get out of here, but he was being an idiot. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my oldest brother's trust. Then out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning in very close trying to hear the whispery man, the guy grabbed my brother's crotch. He was shocked. I was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the crotch grab was super unexpected and a real curveball. After the crotch grab, we started shouting and approached the men in an aggressive manner in a fighting stance. This slowed down their approach enough for us to make a dash for the park exit. The whole situation was unexpected and we didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouting at them. We walked out the exit into the busy city and walked around for a while, making sure we were not being followed before heading back to the hotel. I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. It was during May and I stayed after school with half of my grade due to an award show. It was conducted by the literature department and our principal. Lee and my group actually won the best message award for our short film. Anyways, after the award show was over, me and my friends went back to our classroom to change into more comfortable clothes and to spend some more time together while we waited for our parents to come pick us up. Only 5 of us were in that classroom. As time went by, 3 of my friends left with their parents. It was only me and my best friend in the classroom. 30 minutes later, her dad called her to say they were waiting for her on the school's yard. By the way, our classroom is on the 3rd and highest floor. Together, we walked down the stairs to the ground floor. She asked me if I wanted to come outside with her and maybe wait in the waiting area next to the security. To this day, I curse myself for not saying yes. Instead, I said no and decided to wait in the waiting area inside our building. I could have went to my principal's office office and wait with her since she liked spending time with me and talking to me. If you couldn't tell, I was a nerd and one of the top people in my grade. Anyways, in my school there were 5 couches in the waiting area for both students and parents. As I was walking to the waiting area, I saw a janitor but didn't think much of it. I put my bags down, but as I was about to sit down, I had a weird feeling like he was watching me and my moves. I felt too uneasy to sit down, so I stayed standing up while holding my bags in case I had to run or throw them to save myself. As a reflex, I raised my head and looked at him. He continued to look at me. It was as if we were in a race where neither of us were looking away. Believe me when I say I wanted to look away but couldn't. Maybe it was because I saw him as a threat, or maybe it was because I was too scared and uncomfortable to move. He had this weird smirk on his face, but since it was getting dark, I couldn't exactly tell. I don't know how long we looked at each other, but I broke out of my trance when I saw my classmate from the previous year walking outside the building. In a desperate attempt, I waved at her and she saw it. Then I remember her coming in and walking towards me saying, "I saw someone waving," to which I replied with, "Oh, it was me. I thought you left and was surprised to see you, so I waved at you. Actually, if you don't mind, can you walk me to the waiting area next to the security?" As we were walking outside, I looked back and saw the janitor still staring at me. I was wearing high heels, a short skirt, and a tight shirt, but it was an award show and we wanted to dress up. I don't think that these sort of stuff happen to women because of what they wear, but I do think he was staring at me because of my attire. At the waiting area next to the security, I was so anxious while waiting for my mom, thinking, what if he comes in here? Even when my mom came in, when I got in the car, I was shaking slightly and wasn't in the headspace to speak about anything. So I told my mom that we got an award, but that I was too tired to speak. Also, to anyone wondering, I only told this story to 2 females I used to work with outside of school. I never had the courage to tell my parents or anyone in my school. However, after this incident, I tried to not be alone at school and always have someone with me in case something like this were to happen again. One of the reasons I never told anyone was the fact that nothing physically abusive happened and I probably couldn't prove anything. This was a hard dose of reality for me since I realized that females weren't safe anywhere, not even in their high schools. Writing this makes me feel better in a way that I can finally let it out of my system. It was about 10 in the afternoon and I was staying at a hotel in downtown Chicago right by Lower Wecker Drive. I had just gotten an Uber Eats delivery because they weren't doing room service because of COVID. Potbelly's important later. I was listening to music, but I had my hood up because it was freezing. I was smoking and this guy walked up to me and asked for a few cigarettes. I gave him one and my lighter to use. Come on, you could give me more than that. I thought if I just gave him another cigarette he'd leave, so I gave him another one. I expected him to say thank you, give me my lighter back, and leave. He didn't do any of those things. He was standing right in front of me and I started to get anxious. I moved back and I'm essentially against the window for the area where you check in. He just kept standing there and then he noticed my bag of food. "Can I have some of your food?" I told him I was sorry, that it was just a sandwich and soup because my husband ordered food from a different restaurant. "Well, at least give me half the sandwich then." I apologized again and said no. Then he started getting closer to me. I realized I needed to get away, but he blocked me. "Do give my lighter back." I thought I needed to pretend I wasn't freaking out. I put out my cigarette and put it back in the pack. "I don't have any food and I could freeze to death. I'm sorry, you don't have food." I don't know what else to say. I didn't want to say, "Hey, you're wearing a really nice looking coat and fancy sneakers, so give me some of your food." That he was right up in my face and I was scared because he seemed to be getting more angry. "I'm sorry, I can't, please move." "Yes, you can." At this point, I was terrified he was going to hit me or something, so I banged on the window and the people at the check-in desk ignored me. He got really angry and started yelling incoherently. Then, like a miracle, my mom called and I answered. I started crying hysterically and I started saying, "Mom, thank God, oh my God, this guy won't leave me alone." My mom told me to do anything to get away. At that moment, the guy stepped back and looked around. There was no one around, but I took advantage of him being distracted and pushed past him and ran inside. I was crying so hard I could barely get words out. I was so scared and I realized because I tried to get help and nothing happened. If my mom hadn't called, I don't know what would have happened. Later, I thought even if I gave him the soup, it would be like when I gave him a cigarette and it wasn't enough. I did go back down for a cigarette later, but I stayed by the revolving door. This woman was also smoking and I told her what happened. She showed me her mace and said all women should have it. To give some context, I've been homeless with my mom and her emotional support animal for the last few months. When we first became homeless, it was my first year of college. Where I live, college is free for the first 2 years, and my college, after I gave them an explanation, gave me and my mom a hotel room for a few weeks. The hotel room was fine, nothing special, but was probably better than most considering it was like $170 per night. About 2 days into our stay, we went downstairs to do laundry, but the washers in the hotel was too much expensive for us. so I texted her and was waiting by it for her to pull the car up so we could go to a laundromat instead. While I was waiting, I was on my phone, so I didn't notice my mom pull up, and she yelled to me to hurry up and get in the car. While I grabbed the dog and my clothes, I noticed she was talking to the man 2 doors down from our room. Our room was on the 2nd floor, so I thought it was weird that she started a conversation from the car to someone upstairs, so when I got in the car I asked her about it. She proceeded to tell me after she yelled at me to hurry up, he had responded to her that he'd be down in a minute. So she was explaining to him that she was talking to me. We both thought it was weird that he responded like that to her, but I brushed it off that maybe he was waiting for someone from Uber or something. That was until we got back to see his door slightly open and him staring out of it with just his face. I tried to brush it off again because I thought that maybe he was still waiting for an Uber or Lyft or something, because he had everything in his room turned off and it was still quite cold out being in the beginning of spring. I would see this man staring out of his room with all of his lights off periodically about half the time I left or was coming back to the room. My mom, who is a heavy smoker, would get scared by the man staring at her and would come back inside the room early. So throughout our stay we tried our best to avoid the man if we could. If he opened his door we went back inside. If we went outside or got back from somewhere and he was staring we'd avoid eye contact. A little later that night I went out to the car for something and saw a couple sitting on the stairs talking about something, but I didn't think much of it. Later that night, it was probably about 3 in the morning, I was gaming with my friends and my mom was up watching TV. We're both night owls, when all of a sudden our dog started barking at the door. We thought this was weird since she had never just barked randomly at the door, only really barking when she wanted food we were eating or when she wanted to play. I grabbed her and put her in my lap, petted her while I played to calm her down. Her barking at the door became something she did often during our stay there, and it was almost exclusively at night within the hours of 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. We didn't figure out what her barking was about till the end of our stay in the hotel. Our last day there we saw that couple moving out of their room. Turned out they were next to us and my mom got to talking with them while I was putting our stuff in the car. It turned out the couple was moving rooms because the man from 2 doors down was harassing the couple, knocking on their door and singing to the woman through the door late at night. Our dog was more than likely barking at the man whenever he approached our room, as one night we were awoken by what sounded like a knock before our dog started barking. But by the time I checked the door there was no one there. He was probably trying to do a similar thing he did to that couple with us, and with him staring out the door he was more than likely mentally unwell. And while I hope he gets the help he needs, I also hope he didn't do something potentially harmful to anyone else who ended up in the rooms next to him. I tend to go running and walk my dog anywhere between midnight and 5 in the morning. I vary it for safety. Also, my puppy is a new addition to my nightly routine as I've only had him for a year. I know as a young woman in her 20s it's not smart, but I've been doing it for quite some time. It's where I go to clear my head and feel safe, though it is ironically very unsafe I suppose. I just moved to a new area and though it should be safer than the inner city, I've been having enough odd things happen to make me scratch my head. Tonight, around 4:45 and 5 in the morning as I'm walking my dog in the neighborhoods across the intersection, a silver Toyota is very slowly driving up behind me. Before it passes, it pulls back and reverses. I assume it's someone parking or pulling into their driveway. At this point, I'd already crossed the street to avoid another oddly idling car, so even as I tried to rationalize it, I was on high alert. To backtrack, originally, I'd been walking on the left side and crossed to the right because the first car had pulled up then been idling there for quite some time as my dog, and I slowly made our way up the street towards it. I always play it safe this early, late, so I crossed just in case it was a weird person. As the Toyota reverses, a man steps out of the first car, which is now diagonally from me, looks at me, looks at my dog, locks his car, and heads across the street away from me. This was a T intersection for reference. I'm not sure if this other car is of relevance. However, as I'm paying attention to this, I still note the second car that had reversed into a spot in the street and hadn't moved. No one had gotten in or gotten out. I stay vigilant as there's usually not too much activity in the suburbs around this time unless it's the weekend and people are partying late. 2 cars on the same street. Same behavior was incredibly odd. I breathed a sigh of relief as first guy, who had looked at me several times at this point as he crossed the street and right before he got in, finally left into the apartment complex gate. Sometimes I wonder if I look suspicious too being out so late. I finally make it to the top of the T and go right, and there's only 1 block until a main road, then from there I can cross to my apartment. There's usually a few cars here and there at this time. I make it to the well-lit main street and relax. The second I let my guard down as if on quit, the silver Toyota pulls past past and reverses towards me. Note that before I had it past just idled behind me and now he was reversing in front of me. My gut clenches and I knew it was one of those moments. I go decisions. I hesitate. He's about 5 to 10 yards ahead. I considered walking past normally and running if things got weird, but decided to trust my gut and cross the street. Just as I check traffic to see if I can cross, he steps out. I consider running again. I see Noah coming, not a car in sight. It's a tanned, bald man holding a cigarette. It was particularly strange because rarely have I had people step out of their vehicle to try and do something to me. In my experience, if you ignore whoever is trying to lure you into their car and don't get close, they just drive off. It's why I avoid vehicles in general to not give a chance of contact. He circled all the way around the car to the sidewalk, looks at me then just says, "Oh, I thought you needed a ride," as if he realized something. It was the way he said it, just like that, not a question. As I'm answering, he's already leaving the curb. "No sir." Then he just went back to his driver's side, hops in and drives off. It was just strange. He said it like a statement and basically barely waited for my response. I wonder what he was planning to do and why he had second thoughts. I'll never stop my nighttime adventures, but one day I might not have any more luck left. My name is Slade. I'm 25, born and raised in Arizona. This literally just happened to me, so I decided to bring it here to all of you wonderful people this evening. I'm a huge stoner and don't drive. I decided to take a bus a few miles down to the dispensary. This was at about 8:30 in the afternoon. Wanted to get a new Indica card. Purple Punch, it's my favorite by far. Doubt it. Walked back towards the bus stop to go back home. As I walked closer to the bus bench, I noticed a guy sitting there. Didn't think much of it. I'm antisocial, so I always go into any social setting ready to be absolutely silent. However, I didn't get a chance this time, because as I'm sitting down he starts asking me something ... but I had my headphones on and couldn't quite hear what he said, so I took my headphones off and asked what was that. Then he responds, "Did you want to get your hair cut?" Well, staring at me ... with very wide eyes ... not blinking ... if I were a Betty man. I'd say he was on something. I definitely wasn't expecting that question and I just awkwardly say, "Oh, I'm alright." I then noticed he was wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform and I just so happened to be an Arizona Cardinals fan. So since my entire socializing ability revolves around sports, I decided to ask, "Are you an Arizona Cardinals fan?" He then looks at me funny for a split second. "No, I just got this a few months ago," he says. I then ask, "So how long have you been cutting hair?" Without blinking, he answered, "Just picked it up a few months ago." "Who taught you how to cut hair?" I asked, even more sketched out at this point. His eyes shifted and then he says, "I learned on my own ... Come on man, let me touch you up in the back." Mind you, he was consistently pushing to cut my hair throughout this conversation. I'd even told him like I don't have any cash on me right now, indicating that like I couldn't even pay for this service even if I wanted it ... but he just answers with "That's no problem. I got my clippers in my bag now. Come on." So I decided to just be real with the guy. "Listen, I'm real sorry. I just don't feel very comfortable getting haircuts from people I don't know ... and like at night and stuff. You feel me?" This dude never changed facial expressions this entire interaction. He finally goes, "True that." Continues to glare into my soul. I decided in that moment it was time to get out of there. Luckily this bus stop was right in front of our local gas station, so I just walked in there for a few minutes just to kill time because unfortunately that bus wasn't showing up for another 17 minutes. I didn't want to stay long because I didn't want the employees to think I was stealing or something, so I waited only about 6 to 7 minutes and literally as I'm walking out, there I see the haircut guy walking in, still staring at me. Luckily I walked past him and I just noped out of there to another bus stop down the street. Bus finally got there. I saw the dude at the back of the bus, but he didn't bother me anymore and I made sure to keep my eyes the complete opposite of his direction the entire time. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was 7. My best friend's mom would babysit my brother and I before and after school. My mom would usually drop us off at our house around 6 a.m. in the morning. She would make us breakfast and the three of us would walk to our elementary that was less than 10 minutes away. For preface, we would walk through an adjacent neighborhood through this small wooded area that had an enclosed bridge, and that led us to the back of our elementary. The elementary sits back in a long tree line that runs about half a mile north and another mile south. Anyways, we're about to get to the turn where we walk into the tree line to the bridge and this guy comes cruising down the street. At first I don't even think we noticed him considering how young we were, but right when he's about 10 feet away from us he slows down to virtually 0 miles per hour. There was nothing that stood out about his appearance either. He was middle-aged, white male, very generic. Well, we all stare at the car and start walking super slowly. If we stop he would stop, if we walk he would slowly go. During this whole ordeal he has a blank expression on his face. Not anger, no smirk, just this sinister deadness almost. This went on for probably 5 minutes because we were too scared he'd jump out of the car if we turned our backs on him, and I was mainly scared for my little brother. Finally, he speeds off and we run the rest of the way to school. Immediately go to the principal's office, and at this point we are bawling. We gave them our version of the story, his description, and whatever else a 7-year-old is actually capable of giving. They take action by calling the cops and our parents. The cops come and we explain where it happened in the story again. Then our parents ended up taking us out of school. From then on, we weren't allowed to walk to school anymore and our babysitter would take us. The reason this ended up being so creepy is because apparently there had been reports around that time of a guy who would sit under the bridge we walked over right by the school and watch people. They didn't know if he was homeless or if it was this other guy who we encountered. They never caught the guy and we never saw him again. One night my mom asked me to throw out the trash. I live in a tiny residential complex meaning 6 to 7 small buildings together bounded by a common walls and fencing. It also has 2 small parks in it, so my area is pretty safe. Not a lot of people enter here because it's a bit secluded. That night not a lot of people were present and I was going towards the garbage can, which was right outside the complex. It was dark when I first noticed this guy. We made eye contact and I could tell he was struggling a little to find the address. I just ignored him and threw the trash into the can. While returning, he was still there in the darkest corner, and again I eyed him suspiciously. I really like to help people with addresses, so he called me towards him and said he lost his job in COVID and now has to do this but is not very good at directions. I still was standing at a safe distance because I found this guy suspicious. I asked him where he wanted to go and he answered a location opposite to where I live. I asked to use Google, but then he took out his phone and said, "This is my company phone, I don't know how to use it, please tell me how to." I just told him to type the address, and well, he already knew how to use the Google Maps because the address was already typed in, but still kept asking me how to. I didn't realize that, but he was trying to get me closer to his bike. I was cautious, so I took the phone from his hand and started the maps and handed it to him. He was still asking obvious questions, but I already started walking away. Then he started saying thanks in a very sweet voice that gave me the chills. He was complimenting me how sweet of a girl I am. I waited before going to my building in case he was following me. You might think the interaction I had with him wasn't that creepy, but here's the deal. After a few days I heard a similar story of the delivery guy asking for the same address from my friend, but the creepy part was he gave her the phone and started jacking it in front of her. He even threw a used tissue on her feet while wiping his kids with the tissue in front of her and then trying to touch her. I then heard the same story from another friend, but her story was even worse. She met the same person as well in our local area doing all of the same stuff and jacking it in front of her. He somehow got her number and found her house. He called her and told her that he knew where she lives and how he likes her and all. Turns out a lot of girls of my age group saw and helped this guy and saw him pulling out his thing in front of them and jacking it. I was the only lucky person to not witness it. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.